Welcome to the Consider This channel. Consider This is a free to subscribe to channel where we look at the world's oldest questions, and by using all data to hand, we offer evidence to a realistic conclusion. Whether you use this channel to support your own studies, or simply listen to it while hoovering, all are welcome. This is Chapter 6 of Evidence of Soul. If you have not yet listened to the earlier chapters, may I suggest you do. Now, let's get into it. Evidence of Soul by Sharon Patrice. Chapter 6. Near-Death Experience. Near-Death Experience, or NDE, sounds like something one may feel as one's body nears its end days, knowing the only sure outcome is death, but strangely that is not the case. NDE, we are told by the many people who claim to have experienced the phenomenon, is what happens in between the time period after one is pronounced clinically dead, and before you surprise everyone by coming back to life. Ostensibly, we are informed, it is a profoundly personal experience that seems to embrace a variety of sensations including and foremost a detachment from one's body, feelings of levitation, total tranquility, a calmness or serenity never before experienced, security, warmth, joy, the experience of absolute dissolution. A tunnel is often seen with the presence of light at the end of that tunnel. Then, on occasions one will review major life events, and on some occasions, one may see dearly departed loved ones once again. However, this may not always be the case. On some occasions NDE may well come across as negative. Such experiences may include sensations of anguish, distress, entering a void, vast emptiness, seeing hellish places, fear, and some may include seeing some form of a devil. Testimonial. One case study I noted, many years ago, happened to a lady by the name of Pat. Pat had been 38 years old when suddenly, one early winter's evening while home alone, she felt a blinding headache. She told me she felt sick, and like her head was exploding. As she began to stand, she collapsed, hitting her head on the fireplace. She explained her last memory was of thinking the roaring fire, contained within the fireplace, could spit out and she may burn. She told me she was unable to move, and felt terrified. Around 2 hours later her husband arrived home, saw her lying there, and called the emergency services. She was quickly taken to the local hospital where staff battled to resuscitate her. She was no longer breathing. She remembered watching a nurse busily trying to find a vein in her arm to insert a tube and a doctor frantically trying to revive her. She couldn't understand why they couldn't hear her telling them, "Stop panicking, I'm fine." She said she knew she was near the physical structure of the ceiling, but she felt it did not restrict her. She was completely weightless, and all pain and anxiety had gone. The next thing Pat knew, she had woken up in a hospital bed. She'd had a massive stroke and the right side of her body, in its entirety, had been wiped out as far as further use was concerned. Pat had been a nurse for many years before her stroke, and after 2 years of rehabilitation, which taught her how to walk and talk again, she was invited back to the local hospital to give a lecture to staff about how to communicate with stroke patients in the early days of recovery. Pat's story of floating near the ceiling sounds a little like some form of hallucination. Perhaps a brain striving to hold on to a reality, any type of reality, after such a devastating and frightening shock. However, what happened during Pat's first lecture to the staff at the hospital shone a different light and brought her hallucination into the realms of the phenomenon known as NDE. The staff settled in, and Pat took to the stage. As she spoke, she noticed the doctor whom she had seen from the ceiling. She asked his name and said, "You did not hear me when I told you to stop panicking, did you?" He confirmed he was indeed the doctor who had desperately tried to resuscitate her. "But how did you know it was me?" he asked. As far as he was aware, Pat's heart had stopped beating for some 4 minutes, which was why he was panicking. She could not have seen his face as she was never conscious in his presence. Pat went on to describe the room and the lively conversation between the doctor and several nurses in the room, while looking down upon them. The question then must be, if not some form of hallucination, then what? Explanations for NDEs vary from a scientific approach to a religious conceptualization. Neuroscience research has brought about the hypotheses that NDE is a subjective phenomenon resulting from disturbed bodily multisensory integration that occurs during life-threatening events. Reports from a 2011 study by the New York Academy of Sciences state an estimated 9 million people in the USA have reported an NDE. Most of these NDEs resulted from a severe injury that affects the body or brain. Yet still apart from the experience of NDE being thought of as a psychological phenomenon brought about by the physiological need of the brain to stabilize itself, nothing else has been presented as a possibility or alternative. A 1975 study conducted by psychiatrist Raymond Moody, an American philosopher, psychiatrist, physician, author, and all-round top dog on the subject of NDE, on around 150 patients who all claimed to have witnessed a personal NDE, stated that such an experience has 9 steps. The steps are: 1. Sudden peace and relief from pain. 2. Perception of a relaxing sound or otherworldly music. 3. Consciousness or spirit ascending above the person's body, sometimes remotely viewing medical professionals' attempts at resuscitation. 4. The person's spirit leaving the earthly realm and ascending rapidly through a tunnel of light in a universe of darkness. 5. Arriving at a brilliant heavenly place. 6. Being met by people of the light, who are usually deceased friends and family, in a joyous reunion. 7. Meeting with a deity that is often perceived as their religious culture would have perceived them, or as an intense mass emitting pure love and light. 8. In the presence of the deity, the person undergoes an instantaneous life review and understands how all the good and bad they have done has affected them and others. 9. The person returns to their earthly body and life, because either they are told it is not their time to die, or they are given a choice, and they return for the benefit of their family and loved ones. Moody also explained how not every NDE will have each and every one of these steps, and how it could be different for every single experience. Moody went on to describe the correct approach to an NDE patient is to ask, listen, validate, educate, and refer. Due to the potential confusion or shock attributed to those who experience near-death experiences, it is important to treat them in a calm and understanding way right after their return from the NDE. Kenneth Ring, an American psychologist, co-founder and past president of the International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANDS, and, to boot, is the founding editor of the Journal of Near-Death Studies, built on Moody's work and subdivided the NDE 9 steps on a 5-stage continuum. The subdivisions are: 1. Peace. 2. Body separation. 3. Entering darkness. 4. Seeing the light. 5. Entering another realm of existence, through the light ending by the person then being resuscitated. Ring states that NDEs experienced following attempted unaliving oneself are statistically no more unpleasant than NDEs resulting from any other situations. Ring, along with psychiatrist Bruce Greyson and cardiologist Michael Sabo, assisted in launching the field of NDE studies to the academic world. Between 1975 and 2005, around 3,500 self-reported individual cases of NDE were reviewed in retrospective studies of the phenomena. All these studies were carried out by some 55 researchers. According to Greyson, some NDE phenomena cannot be easily explained with our current knowledge of human physiology and psychology. For example, at a time when they were unconscious, patients could accurately describe events from an out-of-body spatial perspective. In 2 different studies of patients who had survived a cardiac arrest, those who had reported leaving their bodies could describe accurately their resuscitation procedures or unexpected events, whereas others described incorrect equipment and procedures. People may often narrate their near-death experiences as a form of review of their life. Although life review experiences cannot be deemed scientifically realistic nor fact, they are, for the sake of balance, worth noting. One doctor researching and reviewing a particular patient who claimed to have had an NDE states when he, the patient, realized that collision was imminent, the patient said time seemed to slow down as he hit his brakes and went into an uncontrolled slide. Then he seemed to pop out of his body. While in this state, he had a life review which consisted of brief pictures in flashes of his life. His car struck the truck and the truck's bed crashed through the window, causing multiple injuries to his head and chest. Medical reports show that he was in a coma and nearly died. Yet, he had a vivid sensation of leaving his physical body and entering into darkness. He had the feeling of moving up through a dark tunnel toward a point of light. Suddenly a sensation of being filled with love and light appeared to him. He felt bathed in love and compassion as he reviewed the moral choices he had made in his lifetime. Quite suddenly he understood that he was an important part of the universe and that his life had a purpose. Dr. Bruce Greyson asks, can these near-death experience stories tell us about consciousness, the afterlife, and God? The studies of near-death experiences, states Greyson, give considerable probative evidence of transphysical consciousness after bodily death, which is not explained by current physicalist explanations, and is unlikely to be presented by future ones. Nor can it be explained by the medical world, because NDE challenges certain ideas of consciousness. These features in the occurrence of heightened mental functioning when the brain is severely impaired, such as under general anesthesia and in cardiac arrest, challenge the common assumption in neuroscience that consciousness is solely the product of brain processes, or that the mind is merely the subjective concomitant of neurological events. An American surgeon. Dr. Anthony Cicoria, also known as Tony Cicoria, is an American doctor specializing in orthopedic medicine, orthopedic surgery, orthotics, prosthetic supplies, and sports medicine. However, he is perhaps best known for acquiring an unusual affinity, some might say obsession, for music after being struck by lightning. He was profiled in neurologist author Oliver Sacks' book Musicophilia, Tales of Music and the Brain, released to the public in 2007. Cicoria, at the age of 42, was near Sleepy Hollow Lake, a lake near Albany, New York, where his family were gathering in a pavilion for an August holiday event, and needed to call his mother. His mom had not been able to attend the event that year, and as his dad had passed away, she was alone. Tony wanted to check on her. He could see a huge thunderstorm approaching, but the public telephone was on the ground floor just outside the pavilion, so needed to make the call quick before he got wet. Having dialed her number and inserted his money, he then heard an ear-shattering thunderous crack followed by a big flash of light coming out of the phone, hitting him in the face and throwing him backwards like a rag doll. He had been struck by lightning. He tells, as the lightning threw me back, I had the strangest sensation of moving forward. He goes on to tell, I remember thinking to myself, hey, this doesn't make sense. He knew he had been hit, thrown backwards, but also knew he was standing upright. He said, nothing was making sense. His mother-in-law, having witnessed the scenario, came rushing down the stairs. He said, he thought to himself, hey, this can't be good when your mother-in-law comes screaming at you. Tony's mother-in-law fell to her knees, not looking at him, but in another direction. Tony followed her eyeline and saw himself lying on the ground. He was dead. He said the shock of realizing he was dead was difficult to comprehend. He thought when one died there would be something to alert you to the fact, bells, whistles, anything. But instead, he says, it was just a very natural progression. I was in this state 1 second and a different state a second later. I had gone from a physical form to a spiritual form. By chance, a woman, an intensive care unit nurse, had been waiting to use the phone and had seen everything. Tony picks up the story. I see this lady getting down and administering CPR on me. I'm standing there, I'm trying to call out to anyone that would listen. I can see all of them, I can hear them, but no one could see or hear me, and then it occurred to me that I'm thinking the same way I normally would, and I have all these thoughts going through my head trying to make sense of the whole thing, but I realized at that moment, whoever I am, I always am, and there is no such thing as death. My spirit, or whatever it is eternal. He said he'd realized, we are essentially two people. We, our spirit and our physical body. We are in this costume, which is nothing more than the physical body is. The body will die, but the spirit will not. It was not a frightening experience, just a matter of fact. He went on to say, well, I thought to myself, if no one can see or hear me, I may as well go up the stairs and check on my family. So, he started up the stairs, got up to the third step, looked down and saw his legs slowly disappearing. He continued, it was really weird, and as I got to the top of the stairs, I had lost all form. I was just energy. Tony went on to describe how, owing to having no physical form, he did not need to walk to see his family. He went through a wall coming out in a room over the top of where his wife was sitting painting children's faces. He remembered the room, the children, the paint, everything. This would later become an important piece of evidence in Tony's NDE recollections. When leaving that room, he then went up through the roof. He says, that's when things really got interesting. It was like I had fallen into a river of pure positive energy. There was a bluish-white light that all this energy was emanating from. If you can imagine an energy completely composed of love and peace, there were no other emotions, no other senses that I had except that. It was just earth-shaking to feel such love and peace coming from that source. He later equated the energy as a kind of God. He continues, at that point I realized I was going somewhere. I started to see a collage of high and low points in my life. At that point I was just flowing in the stream. I didn't know where it was taking me, but it was almost like an ecstasy. It was such a wonderful feeling then. Suddenly, it was like someone flicked a switch. Suddenly, I was in pain and back in my body. I called out loudly in my head, please don't make me do this, I don't want to go back. Tony realized it was not his choice to stay with the energy or to reoccupy his body and take the burning pain searing from his foot to his face. He was aware the lady giving him CPR had stopped, but it was some time before he could open his eyes. Tony had suffered burns to his face and left foot where the electrical charge had entered and exited his body, and his heart had stopped. The off-duty nurse had successfully got his heart beating again and brought him back to life. Several weeks after his life-changing accident, Tony consulted a neurologist because he was having difficulties with his memory and feeling slow and tired. The neurological exam, including an EEG and an MRI, found nothing unusual. After a few weeks, his energy returned and he went back to work. 2 weeks later, his memory problems disappeared. His life had apparently returned to normal. He decided to keep his experience of NDE more or less to himself. Being a doctor, he did not want to be seen as a lunatic. He began to wonder what his whole experience had been about. Then, without any known explanation, over a 2 to 3 day period, Tony became struck with an insatiable desire to hear classical piano music. He couldn't understand why. He says, it was a big departure for me. I was a kid of the 60s, there was rock and roll, there wasn't really very much else. Nevertheless, Tony drove to the nearest CD outlet in Albany. He tells us, while looking at the vast amounts of classical CDs, a CD of Vladimir Ashkenazy playing his favorite Chopin just jumped right out at me. He bought the CD and says he was absolutely captivated by it. He could not stop listening to it. Soon afterwards, he realized it was no longer enough to just listen. He wanted to be able to play classical piano, and that was a problem as he did not have a piano and, in any case, he couldn't play a piano. However, the very next day the babysitter he and his wife used came to his house and told him she had a problem. She said she would be moving away and had nowhere to store her upright piano. She asked if she could store it at his house for about a year. Tony goes on to say, I thought, okay, that's a bit weird. You know, yesterday I had a thought that I needed a piano and today I've got a piano. For a couple of weeks he taught himself how to play, and then one night he had a dream where he walked onto a stage in a concert hall and saw himself playing the piano. As he walked toward himself, he realized he was not just playing music, he was playing his own music. For the next few weeks that music stayed in his head to the point of absolute inconvenience, where at one point it was loudly playing when he was performing surgery. He purchased a Teach Yourself to Write and Play Music for Dummies, and with a fleeting time had managed to write down the music he had seen himself playing. He says, I was possessed by music, nothing else was important. Tony states with conviction, one thing I have found with music is that it takes me to about as close as I can get to that euphoria of being on the other side. It's a connection I can access, It's a frequency I'm able to tune into. Tony goes on to remind us of the great composer Mozart, who told of the music coming into his head fully formed and stating the only thing he had to do was write it down. Dr. Tony Sikoria concludes, "Our brains are nothing more than receivers." He believes there may be an off-site place that we are able to communicate with. Tony's full story can be heard at youtube.com. Titled Coming Home. Conclusion. Reasons to believe NDEs are connected to the self leaving the body after death may be provided by the heartfelt beliefs of around 95% of all known world cultures understood to have made mention of NDEs in the past or in the present. NDE is not a funky new age religion or self-induced experience, rather it appears to be an occurrence experienced by many throughout the ages. It may well be that we all, at our inevitable time of death, have this intimate connection to self and universe, but only those who escape death and miraculously come back from the brink are able to describe this otherwise inescapable happening. Christopher French, a British psychologist specializing in the psychology of paranormal beliefs, experiences, cognition and emotion, is the head of the University of London's Animalistic Psychology Research Unit, and appears regularly in the media as an expert on testing paranormal claims. In one study, French summarizes NDE by saying, "The most popular interpretation is that the NDE is exactly what it appears to be to the person having the experience. The NDE would represent evidence of the immaterial existence of a soul or mind, which leaves the body upon death, and provides information about an immaterial world where the soul journeys after death." There is a growing body of legitimate research around near-death experience. Reports and peer-reviewed scientific journals have published a number of impressive medical studies on the subject. It may well be that supported NDE narration may provide grounds pointing to evidence that some part of self, does indeed continue beyond death. This is the end of Chapter 6. This is a new channel and we'd like to reach as many folk as possible, so please, do the kid a favor and hit that subscribe button.